Top of the morning to you, ladies and gents. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to episode number 2 of Getting Started with Bitcoin, a Beginner's Guide. This episode is going to talk about what is Bitcoin. It's a question I get asked quite frequently, and it's a hard one for me to answer because Bitcoin means so many different things to so many different people. And aside from that, the technical part of Bitcoin, the inner workings of it all is very complex and difficult to try to wrap your head around. So we're not going to deal with any of that. We're going to leave that for the nerds, for the programmers. We're going to zoom out, keep things big picture perspective. And hopefully at the end of this episode, you'll have a better understanding of what Bitcoin is, why it has so much value, and even though you can't physically hold it in your hand, why so many people across the world are continuing to adopt Bitcoin. So I'm going to share a few definitions of what Bitcoin is, what it means to me. I'm going to compare it to our current monetary system here in Canada. And finally, I'm going to share some stories about how people around the world are utilizing Bitcoin. So let's get the heck into it. It's Friday. Pour yourself a beer. You probably need it here. I got some coffee. Let's get her going. I'm starting with this picture once again because we need to clear our mind of this image. When most people think of Bitcoin, this is what they visualize. A gold-looking coin that you can physically hold. And Bitcoin is not that. Bitcoin is 100% digital. It's a decentralized digital currency. And even though it requires physical energy to create Bitcoin, it's digital. So I'm going to scan the webcam here just like Men in Black. Erase your memory of this picture. And let's try to think about Bitcoin differently. I like to think about Bitcoin as money. It's a much better version of money, as we'll talk about, but it's money nonetheless. And the best description or the best definition I've ever heard somebody describe Bitcoin as is that it's a way to transfer value to anyone else on earth without an intermediary. So let me say that again. Bitcoin is a way to transfer value to anyone else on earth without an intermediary. So there's no third party. There's no middleman. There's no one that can get in between that transaction. It's peer-to-peer. So that's one of the benefits of Bitcoin. And I'm going to talk about 4 of them here as we progress. But the first one is the decentralized network. The second one is the fixed supply of Bitcoin, 21 million that will ever exist. The third one is that it requires physical energy to create Bitcoin. You cannot print Bitcoin. You cannot create Bitcoin. And that is because of the proof of work protocol that Bitcoin uses. Big words, I know, but it basically just requires energy to create Bitcoin. You can't print it out of thin air. And the last part is the inclusive nature of Bitcoin. So anybody on earth with an internet connection can participate in the Bitcoin network. So I'm going to share a few memes here to get things rolling. This is the first one comparing Bitcoin to banks. And Bitcoin was actually created to get rid of central banks. And I know that's hard to understand, and it's a complete mindset shift to think of a world where we didn't have a centralized bank, because that's all we've ever known is a small group of people at the top. They can create as much dollars as they want to. They decide where that goes to. And then they even charge interest on individuals, on corporations, on countries for owing them debt. So that's the world that we live in now. So I'm going to compare Bitcoin to the monetary system, the banking system, and hopefully give you a better understanding of why Bitcoin is so valuable. So this meme says Bitcoin is open 24/7, 365 days a year for 8 billion people. Every person on earth with an internet connection can access this network, and they can never close your account. Banks, on the other hand, this is central banks, retail banks, they're open 9 to 5 on weekdays for 1 billion people approximately on the earth. And they have the ability to close your account, as we've seen. Even here in Canada, which we'll get to in just one sec, but the banks have the ability to freeze your account, freeze your funds. So this is another meme comparing Bitcoin to our banking system. And it's part of the decentralized network of Bitcoin. So it says the Bitcoin network is audited every 10 minutes by tens of thousands of people all across the globe. And if we compare that to the US Federal Reserve, which is the central bank in the US, which is not federal and it has no reserves, has not been audited in 109 years. So I'm going to explain briefly of what this means and how the Bitcoin network audits itself every 10 minutes, what that looks like. Think of the Bitcoin network as a giant ledger of transactions. Transactions would be me sending Bitcoin to you, you sending Bitcoin to your hairdresser for a haircut, your hairdresser sending Bitcoin to their supplier for the hair products. Those are all transactions. So the Bitcoin network is basically just a huge list of transactions. And every 10 minutes, those transactions get put into a block. The Bitcoin network verifies that all those transactions are correct, that I have Bitcoin to send to you, and so on. And once that block is verified and finalized, a new block begins. A new block of transactions begins. And that's why it's called the blockchain. And every time a new block is created, it gets broadcast out to the entire Bitcoin network. So that's why it is incorruptible and immutable, because if you wanted to go back and change a transaction, you would have to get the approval of every person in the Bitcoin network, everybody running a node across the world. You'd have to go request a change, which is impossible. And that's why it's immutable and unstoppable. I hope that makes sense. And we're going to I'm going to tie that in a little bit later to the fixed supply of it and how Bitcoin, every time a new block is mined, that's when new Bitcoin are created, because they get paid out to whoever finalized that block. I hope that makes sense. In Canada, we're pretty lucky. We have a functioning financial system for the most part. It's hanging in there. The majority of Canadians have access to a bank account. But last year, we saw the importance of a decentralized network. The Trucker Convoy in Ottawa. I don't think most Canadians actually realize what happened here. So I'm gonna explain this. Last year, when all the truckers were in Ottawa, there was millions of people across the world who were sending in donations. And our government, the Canadian government, froze the majority of those donations. They shut down the GoFundMe account, which had tens of millions of dollars. They shut down whatever the other website was similar to GoFundMe. They froze that. And so people started sending in Bitcoin. And the only donations that ended up reaching the truckers was Bitcoin. 70% of Bitcoin that was sent in made it to the truckers. The other 30 or 25%, the government interfered with one of the exchanges or something happened, but 70 or 75% of Bitcoin made it to the truckers. And that was the only donations that actually got to them. And as I said, most Canadians don't understand what happened there and the importance of a decentralized network. The rest of the Bitcoin community from around the world, everybody talks about Canada, the Canadian truckers, and how important Bitcoin was in this. They celebrate it and they use it as an example of why a decentralized network is so important, that cannot be stopped, that cannot be changed. And if you want to send donations into a peaceful protest, the government shouldn't have an ability to stop that. And that's what Bitcoin allows. The second thing about Bitcoin that brings so much value to it is the fixed supply of it. And we know that Bitcoin has a fixed supply of 21 million. We know how many Bitcoin are out there at this exact second, and we know how many Bitcoin will be created in the future. And I'm going to quickly flash because last episode I showed this and I said that the dollar supply chart is basically the exact inverse of this. So that's our fiat currency. That's what it looks like. I'm going to get back to that, but I wanted to show that it is a perfect inversion of the Bitcoin network and how new Bitcoin are created. So let's briefly talk about that. I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about the halving schedule. So how are Bitcoin created? I just told you that every 10 minutes, all the transactions get put into a block, and whoever finalizes that block, they get paid out in Bitcoin. And that's how new Bitcoin are created. Every time a block is finalized, whoever mines that block gets rewarded with Bitcoin. And we can see here in 2009, there were 0 Bitcoin in circulation. In 2013, 10 million of these Bitcoin had been mined, created, and put into circulation. Another 4 years goes by, another 5 million coins are created. And if we fast forward to 2023, 19 million Bitcoin have been mined, created, and into circulation. So for the next 120 years, there's only 2 million Bitcoin left to be mined. And the reason why it's so front heavy here is because of the halving schedule. I know this is a lot to kind of absorb here, but try to bear with me. So the halving schedule makes sure that the new supply of Bitcoin gets chopped in half every 4 years. So let's look at what that means. I'm going to talk about right now, because if you're mining Bitcoin right now, every 10 minutes, a new block is created and it gets paid out with 6 Bitcoin. That's the amount, the block reward, 6 Bitcoin. In 2024, when the new halving schedule kicks in, those block rewards for finalizing the transactions, creating a block, they will get paid out 3 Bitcoin because it chops in half every halving schedule, every 4 years. 2028, those same Bitcoin miners, they finalize a block, they'll only get paid 1.5 Bitcoin. And the chart doesn't show it here, but if we fast forward to 2032, those same Bitcoin miners will get 0.75 of a Bitcoin. And so you can see how the supply over time goes down. And that's why there's so many Bitcoin created here, because of the halving schedule. And as we go along, it goes down and down and down. And I talk about this all the time. It's the perfect economic recipe, because we know that the demand for Bitcoin is going up. It's the fastest growing technology in human history, faster even than the World Wide Web. And because we know the schedule, the supply is going down over time because of the halving schedule. So the demand is going up, the supply is going down. And so over time, in the long run, the price can only move one way, which is up. A lot to take in there. But the thing to highlight here with the fixed supply, and if we compare it to our current system in Canada, with Bitcoin, there's a fixed amount, 21 million will ever exist. We know that. We know how many Bitcoin are in circulation right now. And we know how many Bitcoin will be created in the future because of this schedule. And if we flip that on its head, our current system, there's no fixed supply. It's infinite. We do not know how many dollars are out there right now. We have an idea of what they tell us, but as we mentioned, they've never been audited before. So we do not know how many dollars are out there. And we do not know how many dollars will be created into the future. If there's a new war, if there's a new global pandemic, or they want to send a country some foreign aid, they can print money. But we don't know what that schedule looks like. They're complete inverse. This chart here shows the new dollars in circulation. And this chart actually only goes to 2007. The next chart I'll show is horrifying. But I want to focus here on 1971, because that's when the USA took the world off the gold standard. So up to 1971, in order to create new money, you had to have gold in reserves. You had to have gold in the vaults. 1971, that all changed. And the world changed dramatically since then. You can see the sharp increase. We're starting to see the major effects of this with inflation, with people around the world suffering, homelessness. It all ties back to being able to create money. So up until 1971, it was basically flat because they needed gold to create new money. Since then, since 1971, we've basically been living in a world run by monopoly money. It's essentially what it is, because it's backed by nothing. They have the ability to create as much as they want, and it's backed by nothing. So that, remember I just said it was horrifying? This is what the Canadian dollar supply looks like. And we can see 1955, 1965, 1971, it's essentially flat. It was tied to gold. I sound like a broken record here, but I want to make sure that you understand this because it's the most important part of this. Up until 1971, they needed gold in order to create new dollars. Once that ended, that's when we start to see the increase. They can print as much as they want. And if you see how flat that line looks like, up to about there, that's where 2007 is. It looks flat on here, but that's what it looks like without 2008 and without 2020 on there. That's exactly what we see. 2008 printed a bunch of money to save the banks. Then we kind of stabilized a wee bit, and then the global pandemic happened, and then the chart broke. And so you look at this chart, and I think most people can understand just based on this chart and based how much money they've printed in the last 50 years, how much they've devalued our wealth and taken away our purchasing power. I think that's enough reason just to buy a little bit of Bitcoin by itself because of the fixed supply nature of it. But that's wild. The next thing I'm going to talk about here is the requirement of physical energy to create Bitcoin. And I talked about the proof of work protocol. Sounds like a fancy word, but all it means is that you have to prove that work was done, that energy went into creating the Bitcoin in order for new Bitcoin to come into circulation. So comparing that to our dollar, where they do not require energy, they require energy to power the printing press of new dollars. But now they just basically add zeros to their balance sheet and create new money. And that's how new money, they just add zeros. It doesn't require any actual physical energy. Whereas Bitcoin, in order to earn Bitcoin, to contribute to the network, to secure the network, you have to have electricity. You have to have a Bitcoin mining machine. And that Bitcoin mining machine is what secures the network. So it all comes from physical energy, proof of work. And the reason I showed this picture here is because it not only requires energy, but it actually utilizes energy that would have otherwise been wasted. So if you're watching this from the prairies where I'm from, you drive by these oil rigs at night and you can see stuff like this. They're burning off the methane or the natural gas, and it's going into so it doesn't go into the environment. They can either burn it off or let it go into the environment. Bitcoin now has the ability to capture that, what would have otherwise been harming to the environment, as some people believe anyways, harming the environment or wasted. Now they have the ability to capture that energy and turn it into Bitcoin. And there are oil companies across Canada who have already implemented this. And instead of wasting that energy, they're converting it into Bitcoin. And the long-term vision of this, to me, and what we're already seeing in El Salvador, is that instead of utilizing human labor, we're now able to harness natural resources, wasted energy, convert that into Bitcoin, into money. So in El Salvador, they're doing the exact same kind of thing, but they're using volcanic energy to mine Bitcoin. And so their long-term goal in El Salvador is to utilize natural wasted energy and take away the human labor aspect of it and eliminate income taxes. And we've seen the US last week, the House of Representatives introduced a bill saying we want to abolish the IRS, we want to get rid of income taxes. And this kind of stuff is gonna be what allows that for get too excited talking about this stuff. That's what's going to facilitate the ability to eliminate income taxes, is utilizing wasted energy. But the most important part here is that it actually requires energy. You cannot create Bitcoin out of thin air. And think about, just to go back on that, think about what kind of world that's going to create. Try to fund a world war without the ability to print new money. So if no countries have the ability to fund a war, what happens? In the past, every time there was a war that's been created, the governments print money, and that's how they fund the war. If you take away their ability to print money, what happens? It's hard to imagine a world, I know. And that's, like I said, it's a complete mind shift because we've grown up in a world where this is kind of like a foreign language almost, taking away the centralized authorities, but that's what Bitcoin solves. And now I'm going to talk about a few other things that Bitcoin solves. And one of them is for small businesses. So think of the Visa network. And our business, King Golf, perfect example of this. Although we don't have a physical store, we do have merchant fees. We do have transactions fees. They're usually 2 or 3% every time somebody wants to pay you. Every time a customer purchases a product or service from you, Visa takes 2 or 3% of that. And small businesses, especially now, their profit margins are so narrow that 2 or 3% makes a huge difference, especially over time. And when we're talking big dollar sums. So Bitcoin solves this. Bitcoin has a Lightning network that facilitates this exact same transactions, but for zero fees, essentially, almost zero, speed of light, with more privacy as well. So once businesses start to realize that they could save 2 or 3% off of every transaction, every time somebody wants to pay them, they can save 2 or 3%. While behind the scenes, it looks exactly the same. Plus, they offer their clients or their customers the ability to pay with Bitcoin. That's when things will change in a big way. And the second part of this is the money mart aspect. So right now in Canada, we have people coming from different countries. They come to Canada to work and they want to send money back home. And right now, basically the only way to facilitate that is by using a money mart, which is extremely difficult and inconvenient for these people. So they have to physically go down to the store. They take their cash, they send it. Money Mart facilitates that. But in doing so, they take about 15, 20, 25% of a fee off of this. So by the time it gets home, if they send $100, 75 gets there. And it takes a couple days. And they might have issues with their bank receiving it. Huge inconvenience, right? Compare that to Bitcoin, the Lightning Network. This facilitates the ability to do this. When businesses start to realize they can save 2 or 3%, when individuals start to realize that they can send money anywhere in the world without a money mart, without the fees, without the delay, that's when Bitcoin will get adopted at a mainstream level, and that's when everything will change. And it's honestly, well, I shouldn't say this, but it feels like it's only a matter of time. Once people realize the value, the capabilities of Bitcoin. I've sat down with people in the last couple months and I just showed them how to use a Lightning wallet on your phone and how fast it is and how fast it transfers and how easy it all is to do. Most people don't think about Bitcoin this way. And that's why I'm hoping to translate this in these type of videos and explain the capabilities that Bitcoin brings. Here's another part of it. It's going to be unlocking talent within the world. So we're used to this global network, but we've never had a global currency to facilitate that. So if King Golf, I'm going to use our company as an example. If I wanted to hire somebody in South Africa to do some graphic design work for us, if I really liked the work that they do, I would have to get in touch with my bank, get in touch with their bank, get their banking information. The banks might ask me why I'm sending money to South Africa. They have the ability to stop it. It'll take a few days to get there. It's a hassle. Sending remittances to different countries right now is a huge hassle because of the banks, the banking system. With Bitcoin, I don't know who the heck this guy is, doesn't matter, but I found his website and he says, I only accept Bitcoin as payment. So instead of having to send an invoice, convert it to whatever currencies both parties are using, without having to rely on the banks and the delay on that, you can just send Bitcoin for zero fees, essentially, instantly to anyone in the world. So what I believe this is going to do is unlock a huge talent pool across the world that we haven't had access to, and they haven't had access to us as well. As I said, the internet provides a global network, but we've never had a globally recognized currency before, and that's what Bitcoin solves, and I hope will facilitate in the years to come. The last part here is probably the most popular, not popular, but most people think this is the reason that people own Bitcoin, is to get away from this. And in Canada, we're fairly lucky to only have, we only have 8 or 10% inflation here. And I want to talk about Argentina. So 1 year ago, inflation in Argentina was 50%, 50. Today, it's 93% inflation in Argentina. So if you had a $100 bill in Argentina last year, that same $100 bill, the purchasing power of that would only be $7 or $8 today. That's bananas. And Argentina is not the only country that's going through this. The governments in these countries who are sinking, their only option right now is to print as much cash as they can to try to stay afloat. And every dollar that they print, they devalue their citizens' currency. And that's why people with what little money they have in these countries, they're using Bitcoin to store their wealth, to store their purchasing power into the future, because their currencies are being printed away. And like I said, in Canada, this isn't a huge problem. And that's why I kind of left it for last, because it isn't really relevant to us at this point. It's getting there, but it's not to a 90% inflation rate like Argentina has. It's scary to think about that. And very thankful to be living in a country like Canada, even though, 8-9%, it isn't great, but it's not 90%. But let's round this out. Somebody asked ChatGPT, can anyone stop Bitcoin? And ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence software program that you can ask any question to. It'll give you an answer like this. You can ask it to write you a movie script, anything. It's amazing technology, scary in a way, but it's going to have a huge impact on our future. So anyway, somebody asked it, can anyone stop Bitcoin? And the answer was, it is unlikely that anyone can stop Bitcoin at this point, as it is a decentralized network that is not controlled by any single person or entity. The Bitcoin network is powered by a vast network of computers around the world that work together to process transactions and maintain the blockchain, which is the public ledger that records all Bitcoin transactions. This decentralized nature of the Bitcoin network makes it extremely resilient and difficult to try and shut down. So essentially, no, you can't stop Bitcoin. You can try. Countries have tried. China tried to China tried to ban Bitcoin mining a couple years ago, and the network was impacted by it. Half the network went down. But the rest of the Bitcoin network, because it's decentralized, because it's spread out across the world, the Bitcoin network kept going, block by block, 10 minutes at a time. Nothing changed, other than it was actually easier for the current Bitcoin miners to earn rewards because there was less competition now. So countries probably will try to stop Bitcoin, but if they're smart, they'll adopt Bitcoin. And as I said, El Salvador was the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender. And in doing so, they saw a huge increase of tourism, of new infrastructure in El Salvador. And their long-term goal is to eliminate income taxes and rely on their unused natural resources, converting that into Bitcoin and using that to fund their operations. So it's a huge change, and it's not just money. It has implications worldwide at every level, but it's decentralizing the world. And that's the most important part to understand. This has been well over 20 minutes. Like I said, I apologize for that. The majority of videos will be between 10 and 20 minutes long, but this one's important. If at any time, the next episode is going to be how to buy Bitcoin, but if any time you want to skip ahead, or if you're already in the process of trying to buy some Bitcoin, you can scan this QR code right here with your phone. It'll take you directly to my calendar, and you can book a 15-minute call for free. We can figure out what you want to do, what your goals are, and I can help you facilitate that. It makes such a huge difference when you're getting started to have somebody who's been there before to hold your hand through it, make sure you don't make any critical errors during the process, and just feel better about it. Not only buying the Bitcoin, but storing your Bitcoin. It helps you sleep better at night, and that's what I'm here for. So you got half an hour, you can do an hour, 2 hours. I'm flexible with the time and the topic. Hope you learned something. Next episode will be a little bit more fun. It'll be shorter. Going to teach you how to buy Bitcoin on a decentralized exchange without any KYC, the easy way. And then if you want to contribute, or if you want to purchase a large amount of Bitcoin, I'll give you some resources for that as well. So hope you learned something. Hope you've been getting some benefit and value out of these videos. I really appreciate you watching. Last time, last ad. And we'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.